Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are doing something a little different.
A lot different.
Yeah. Usually, we take a stack of articles about, the latest tech trend or a piece of history that everyone kind of vaguely remembers from high school. But today, we are opening a file that is going to completely scramble your internal GPS.
It really is a disorienting experience. We're looking at Harry Turtledove's The Great War,
Right.
American Front. And I think scramble is the right word because it takes the map of the world, specifically the map of North America, and it tears it in half.
Literally. I was looking at the provided materials, looking at the map for this timelines version of 1914, and my brain kept trying to fix it.
Right.
You see the United States up top. Okay, that looks normal-ish. But then you look down, and everything south of the Mason-Dixon line is a different color. The foreign country.
The Confederate States of America.
And not just as a rebellion that failed.
No.
But as a sovereign nation that has existed for 50 years.
That's the key. This isn't a story about the Civil War. This is a story about what happens 50 years after the South wins. We are looking at a world where the United States broke, and it never got put back together.
And now, it's 1914.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the world is gearing up for World War I. But instead of the U.S. sending troops to France...
The Western Front isn't in France.
It's in Virginia.
It's in Kentucky. It's on the Potomac River. Exactly.
So before we get to the trenches, and believe me, we are going to get to the trenches and the tanks and some truly bizarre leadership choices, we have to figure out how we got here.
We have to set the stage.
The source material has this prelude section set in 1862, and it paints a picture of Abraham Lincoln that is, well, it's haunting.
It is. In our timeline, we think of 1862 as the year the tide started to turn for the Union. Antietam, the Emancipation Proclamation, is on the horizon. But in this timeline, the divergence point is a battle called Camp Hill in Pennsylvania.
Which I'm assuming is their version of Antietam. Or Gettysburg, maybe.
It's their Antietam, but it goes the other way. It's the moment Robert E. Lee invades the North, but instead of being stopped, he absolutely crushes the Union Army.
It's not just a loss, then.
Oh, no. The sources describe Lee standing on a ridge watching Stonewall Jackson and Longstreet just dismantle the Union forces. They trap them against the Susquehanna River. It's a total rout. The Army of the Potomac ceases to exist.
Right.
And that leads to the scene in the White House that I found really hard to read, not because it's graphic, but because it's just so sad. You have Lincoln late at night meeting with Lord Lyons.
I'm British minister.
Right. And Lincoln isn't the great emancipator here. He's a losing president. He's cornered. And Lyons basically walks in and dictates terms to him.
He's not there to negotiate.
Not at all. The context here is vital. The South didn't just win on the battlefield. They won because Great Britain and France decided to intervene.
The big European powers picked a side.
They picked a side. They recognized the Confederacy. They broke the Union blockade. Lord Lyons is there to tell Lincoln, look, the war is over. We are recognizing the CSA. If you don't accept that, the Royal Navy is going to burn Boston and New York.
It's an ultimatum.
It's a gun to the head of the United States. And you can feel Lincoln's defeat in the room.
And Lincoln's reaction. He's so bitter. There's this line where he looks at the British minister and says, "You are the guardian angels for the rebels." The sarcasm is just dripping off the page.
That sarcasm is his only defense mechanism left. He feels betrayed. He feels that the great democracies of Europe, Britain, and France were terrified of a rising America, so they took the first chance they got to chop it into manitive pieces.
And honestly, in this timeline, he's right.
He is right.
They did. But this meeting, this one moment of humiliation, it sets the psychological stage for everything that happens in the next 50 years.
Yeah.
Because Lincoln doesn't just roll over. He accepts the mediation, he accepts the split, but he issues a warning, a promise, really.
The prophet. Yeah. He tells Leon, one fine day, I reckon, we'll have friends in Europe, too.
That is the line that gave me chills. We'll have friends in Europe, too. It's a threat.
It's a prophecy, and it explains why the map of alliances in 1914 looks so bizarre to us, because the United States spends the next 50 years stewing in this humiliation, looking for a way to strike back at Britain and France.
Looking for their own guardian angels.
Exactly.
So fast forward, it's 1914. The Great War is about to kick off. But the teams are completely scrambled. Let's break down the roster because this threw me for a loop. In our history, the U.S. eventually joins Britain and France here.
Here, the United States is part of the Central Powers. They are allied with the German Empire and Austria-Hungary.
The land of the free is best friends with the Kaiser. How does that even happen?
It's pure realpolitik. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If Britain and France are the guardian angels of the Confederacy, then the United States naturally gravitates toward Germany.
Because Germany is the big rival to Britain in Europe.
Right. Germany is the rising power in Europe that wants to challenge Britain. The U.S. is the power in North America that wants to challenge the CSA and, by extension, Britain. It's a perfect marriage of convenience.
Which means the Confederacy.
It is part of the Quadruple Entente, the Confederate States of America, Great Britain, France, and Russia.
That is a wild dinner party. You have the King of England, the Tsar of Russia, and the President of the Confederacy, all on the same team.
And they are all bound by treaty. If Germany attacks France, the Confederacy has to attack the United States. If the U.S. attacks Canada, which is British territory,
then Britain has to attack the U.S.
It's the same domino effect as our World War I, but the dominoes are lined up completely differently.
Okay, speaking of presidents,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the leadership. Because if the alliances are weird, the people in charge are straight up ironic. Who is running the United States in 1914?
Theodore Roosevelt.
Teddy, the Rough Rider. Of course it's Teddy, but he's not the Teddy we know, is he? The national parks guy, the trust buster.
He's deeper into his own persona, if that's possible. He's more extreme. In this timeline, because the U.S. is allied with Germany, Roosevelt has become a bit of a Germanophile. The sources describe him as strutting and swaggering. He's actually styled his mustache to look like Kaiser Wilhelm's.
No way. Are you serious?
Dead serious.
He's doing a Kaiser cosplay.
Essentially. But it signals something dangerous. He's militaristic. He's been preparing the country for this rematch against the South his whole career. He's not looking for peace. He's looking for vengeance.
Okay, that's intense. And his counterpart, the President of the Confederacy. This is the one that it short-circuited my brain.
This is the one that usually breaks people's brains. The president of the CSA is Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson, the guy who, in our reality, wanted to make the world safe for democracy. The college professor from Princeton.
The Virginian. Remember, Wilson was born in Virginia. In our timeline, he moved north and became a U.S. president. In this timeline, he stayed south. And the source material gives us a speech he makes in Richmond, the Confederate capital. It is not about democracy.
What's he selling? What's his platform?
He's selling white supremacy and anti-German sentiment. He talks about white men's rights being threatened by the German tyrant and his American lackeys. He calls Roosevelt a fool who is leading the North to ruin.
Wow.
It's fascinating because it shows how environment shapes a person. Wilson is still an intellectual, still a compelling speaker, but his moral compass is pointed in a completely different direction.
So you have Kaiser Teddy in the north and Confederate Wilson in the south, and they are just waiting for a spark.
And the spark is the same. Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot.
That's the one constant in the multiverse, apparently. Poor Franz always gets it.
It seems so. But the reaction time here is terrifyingly fast. We get this perspective from a fisherman in Boston, George Enos. He's out on his boat, the Ripple, just doing his job.
Right.
And he runs into a German cruiser, the York.
And he's not scared. He doesn't think it's an invasion.
No, he's happy. He sells them fish. They're allies. He's trading with them. But it's this calm before the storm. Because once the news hits, Austria declares war, Russia mobilizes, Germany invades France, the treaties activate instantly.
It's not like our timeline where the U.S. sits out for 3 years.
Zero hesitation. The moment Britain declares war on Germany, the U.S. declares war on the Confederacy and Britain. And suddenly, George Enos isn't selling fish to friendly Germans. He's watching the ocean turn into a war zone.
And that war zone isn't just the ocean. This is the part that I think is hardest to grasp. The war comes home instantly, specifically to Washington, D.C.
Right. Think about the geography. In this timeline, the border isn't a safe line on a map 100 miles away. It's the Potomac River.
Which means the capital of the United States is on the front line.
It's within artillery range. The Confederates have spent 50 years fortifying Arlington Heights.
So where we have Arlington National Cemetery today.
They have heavy artillery batteries, big guns, and they're looking directly down the throat of the White House, the Capitol, the monuments.
And we get the perspective of a Confederate officer, Jeb Stuart III.
The grandson of the famous cavalry general, a legacy officer.
And he's standing there, looking across the river at the dome of the Capitol, looking at the Washington Monument. And he gives the order to fire.
It's the bombardment of a modern Western capital. This isn't a siege from the 1800s with cannonballs bouncing off walls. This is high explosive shells.
Right.
The sources describe the Washington Monument taking a direct hit. It chips and then cracks. The Capitol dome is smashed in. The White House is shelled.
The image of the Capitol dome being smashed, that is a potent symbol. I mean, can you imagine seeing that on the news?
It signifies the end of the American idea as we know it. The government has to flee. They move the capital to Philadelphia because D.C. is uninhabitable. It's a war zone.
And for the people living there, we meet Nellie Semfrick. She runs a coffee shop in D.C., and her story really drives home the transition from old war to new war.
She remembers the last war. There was a second Mexican War in 1881.
Wait, they fought again in 1881?
They did. The U.S. and CSA have fought wars every couple of decades. It's like this constant low-grade fever that keeps flaring up. But 1881 was still almost gentlemanly.
How so?
Sporadic shelling. You could hide in the cellar. But 1914, she describes the sound of the shells as freight train noises. It's constant. It's industrial. It never stops.
She steps outside her shop and sees a delivery wagon that's been hit. The horses are dead in the street. It's gory. But then she hears something else. She compares it to a giant ripping a piece of canvas.
That is one of the most chilling descriptions of a machine gun I've ever read, ripping canvas.
Because it's so fast. It's not individual shots.
It's continuous fire. Nellie sees a U.S. battalion marching down the street, young guys, eager, probably thinking this will be a quick adventure, and then the Confederate spotters on Arlington Heights see them, and that ripping sound starts.
And they just dissolve.
They're cut to pieces. They just fall down.
Nellie ends up dragging a wounded soldier into her shop. He's a machine gunner himself. And in that moment, the romanticism is dead. She realizes this isn't a battle, it's an extermination. It's the sum, but it's happening on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Exactly. And that disconnect between the old idea of war and the new reality is personified perfectly by one specific general.
Oh, this guy. I honestly thought this was a typo in the notes at first. General George Armstrong Custer.
He is still alive.
In our timeline, he died at Little Bighorn in 1876, a famous last stand.
In this timeline, the Sioux didn't get him, so here he is in 1914. He's 75 years old.
And he's not aging gracefully, is he?
Not at all. The source material is ruthless with him. He's described as fat, hard of hearing. He dyes his hair and his mustache this unnatural yellow color to try and look like the boy general he used to be.
It's pathetic, but it's also dangerous because he's in command of the 1st Army in St. Louis. That's a huge command.
He's a relic. He hates Teddy Roosevelt because he thinks TR stole his glory in the 1881 war. But worse, he hates technology. He looks at airplanes, which are being used for scouting, and he calls them toys. He thinks they're a fad.
He literally dismisses air power.
He dismisses everything new. He wants to fight the War of 1862. He wants to mass cavalry in charge. He plans this massive invasion of Kentucky, crossing the Ohio River, and he treats it like a grand parade.
And this leads to the river crossing scene with Paul Mantarakis. This poor guy. He's a Greek-American cook who got drafted.
And he's stuck on a barge. Custer's plan is to just shove thousands of men onto wooden barges and float them across a wide river into enemy territory.
It sounds like a turkey shoot.
It is. The Confederates are entrenched on the other side with artillery and machine guns. As soon as the barges get to the middle of the river, the artillery opens up. Mantarakis describes the water fountaining up, turning red, but then it gets worse.
On monitors.
The river monitors, ironclad gunboats, basically floating fortresses. They come around the bend and just start blasting these wooden barges at point-blank range.
It's barely combat. It's just murder.
It shows the cost of the Custer factor. You have 19th century egos leading men into 20th century machine gun fire. The U.S. eventually pushes across, largely because of their own artillery sinking the monitors, but the cost is astronomical.
So we have the River War. But then we move to the mountains. The trench warfare in Virginia, this felt very Western Front.
It is. We follow Corporal Chester Martin. He's fighting in the Appalachians near Roanoke. The U.S. is trying to capture a rail hub called Big Lick.
Big Lick.
That was the old name for Roanoke. And the fighting there is grueling. It's not glorious charges. It's creeping forward inches at a time from trench to trench through the woods.
And Martin is constantly doing the math in his head.
The survivor's math.
Right. He looks at his squad and thinks, okay, we lost 3 guys last week. We'll lose 3 more next week. By next month, I'll be the only one left. It's that grinding, attritional despair.
He knows he's going to die. It's just a matter of when.
They're dealing with snipers, barbed wire. It's a stalemate in the woods. But out west, out in Kansas, the war looks different.
The Kansas front is fascinating because it's wide open. It's maneuver warfare.
And this is where we see the cavalry versus machine showdown. We get the perspective of a Confederate cavalry unit.
Led by Captain Lincoln. No relation, obviously, to the other one.
Irony abounds in this timeline.
It really does. So these guys are riding horses, they have carbines, they are raiding U.S. supply lines, blowing up train tracks, they feel like masters of the plains. They're living out the old glorious ideal of cavalry until they run into the Thing.
The armored car.
Which is really an early tank. The U.S. calls them barrels.
Why barrels?
Same reason the British called them tanks in our timeline. To fool the spies. They shipped them in crates marked water barrels or water tanks to maintain secrecy. So the name stuck.
So you have these guys on horses, these cavalrymen, and suddenly this steel box on tractor treads comes rumbling out of the wheat field.
And the psychological shock is immense. The horses panic, the men fire their carbines, and the bullets just ping off the steel. They have no effect, and the barrel just rotates its turret and opens fire with a machine gun.
It mows them down.
It's effortless. The machine doesn't get tired, it doesn't get scared, it doesn't feel anything, it just kills.
But the tech isn't perfect yet, is it? The barrel gets stuck in a shell hole or a ravine.
Right. It's heavy and clumsy and prone to breaking down. The Confederates managed to flank it and blow a tread with dynamite. But the aftermath is telling. When the U.S. crew climbs out to surrender, the Confederates kill them.
They execute them.
They are so angry. They are furious that these men could sit inside a safety box and kill their friends without any risk. It feels unfair to them. It feels like a violation of the rules of war.
Captain Lincoln admits later, I don't know how to fight these if there are more than one.
He realizes the horse is obsolete. The age of the machine has arrived.
Okay, so the military side is horrific. But the part of this deep dive that really stuck with me, the part that kept me up thinking, is the social side. Because the Confederacy isn't just fighting the U.S., it's sitting on a volcano.
This is the most complex part of the timeline. The status of black people in the CSA in 1914.
So clarify this for me. Slavery is gone.
Official.
Technically, yes. The source material explains that after the War of 1881, the CSA needed British support so badly that they agreed to manumission. They freed the slaves. It was a political move. But they replaced slavery with a caste system that is almost as bad. It's apartheid on steroids. We meet a character named Cincinnatus in Kentucky. He's a laborer, and his life is defined by the passbook.
Explain the passbook.
It's an internal passport. Every black citizen has to carry it. It lists who they work for, where they live. If a police officer stops Cincinnatus and his book isn't stamped correctly, prison, hard labor.
So he can't move freely. He can't change jobs without his white boss's permission.
He is tied to the land and the labor force by law, if not by ownership. He describes the constant fear. He has to step off the sidewalk when a white man passes. He has to keep his eyes down. It's a suffocating existence of constant daily humiliation.
And he's stuck between two rocks. He considers running to the U.S. lines, but the U.S. isn't a haven. That's the ugly truth of this timeline. The United States in 1914 is also incredibly racist. They don't want a sudden influx of black refugees. Cincinnatus knows that if he runs north, he might just get thrown back or treated like dirt there too. He's trapped.
So the pressure is building. And this brings us to Marshland's plantation in South Carolina. This was a scene that felt like a thriller movie.
The contrast here is brilliant. You have Anne Colleton. She's the mistress of the plantation. She's wealthy, educated. She thinks of herself as a modern woman. She's hosting an art exhibit in the main house.
Right. She's showing Picasso's and Duchamp's in the plantation house. She has President Wilson there as a guest. They are drinking champagne, talking about civilization and culture.
While literally beneath their floorboards in the servant quarters, the revolution is being planned.
This is the story of Scipio and Cassius.
Scipio is the butler. He's an older man, just trying to survive by being invisible. But he finds something in the cabins, a book.
A hymnal. Dr. Gilray's collection of Christian hymns.
That's the cover. A perfect disguise. But when he opens it, it's not hymns. It's the Communist Manifesto.
Karl Marx in the Deep South.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Marx wrote about the proletariat rising up against the bourgeoisie. In the CSA, the proletariat is the black working class. The field hands, led by this intense guy named Cassius, are reading Marx. They aren't looking for civil rights reform. They are looking for a red revolution.
Cassius is terrifyingly clear about this. He sees the war between the U.S. and CSA as his opportunity. He says, white folks, they in this big war. One fine day, they ain't expecting it nohow. The revolution come.
He's betting that the whites will bleed each other dry and then the workers will rise up and burn the whole fiefdom down. It's a calculated, patient form of rage.
Scipio is almost killed just for finding out.
Cassius threatens him. You tell the white folks, we cut your throat. It shows that the black community is radicalizing rapidly and in secret. The CSA is fighting a war on the border, but there is a class war and a race war brewing in their own backyard.
And it's not just the agricultural South. We go to Birmingham, Alabama, the steel mills.
The Pittsburgh of the South.
We meet white workers there. Jeff Pinkard, and he is angry. Very angry.
He's angry because of economics. The war demands huge amounts of steel. The factories are running 24/7. But all the white men are getting drafted into the army. So factory owners have no choice. They start hiring black men to work the machines.
Jobs that were previously reserved for whites.
Exactly. And men like Pinkard see this as a direct threat. They are terrified that if black men prove they can do the job, the white wages will go down to what they call black wages, or they'll be replaced entirely.
So you have racial tension mixed with economic anxiety.
It's a powder keg. The war is breaking the caste system out of sheer necessity, and the white working class hates it.
Is the U.S. dealing with anything similar? I mean, they don't have the same caste system, but they have political unrest.
They have the socialists. We meet Flora Hamburger in New York City. She's a soapbox speaker.
And she's having a bad year.
A terrible year, because the core promise of socialism was internationalism. Workers of the world unite. The idea was that a German worker and an American worker have more in common with each other than with their bosses. They shouldn't shoot each other for the benefit of the rich.
But then the shooting starts.
And nationalism wins, easily. Flora watches her own neighborhood. Jewish immigrants, German immigrants get swept up in war fever. Her Jewish butcher neighbor is cheering for the war against the rebels.
She tries to tell them you're cheering for workers killing workers.
And they ignore her, or call her a traitor. Even the socialist politicians in Congress vote for the war budget because they don't want to be lynched politically. It shows how fragile those ideals are when the drums start beating.
So the home fronts are crumbling. The armies are bleeding. But this is a world war. It's not just happening in America. We have to look at the global map.
The naval war is huge. And again, it completely flips the script on what we know.
Let's go to the Sandwich Islands.
Which we know as Hawaii. In this timeline, Hawaii isn't an American state. It's a British protectorate. It's a major Royal Navy base in the Pacific.
So the U.S. Navy decides to pay them a visit. But this felt sneaky.
It's a surprise attack. We follow a sailor named Sam Carston on the battleship Dakota. The U.S. fleet steams across the Pacific under radio silence. They catch the British ships at anchor in Pearl Harbor.
It's Pearl Harbor, but the U.S. are the Japanese in this scenario.
Tactically, yes. But instead of planes, it's battleships. The U.S. fleet crosses the T.
Explain that maneuver again. The source material made a big deal of it, but it's a bit of a naval history deep cut.
It's the holy grail of naval warfare in that era. Imagine the British fleet is in a single file line coming out of the harbor. They're the vertical part of the letter T. The U.S. fleet sails across the top of that line, perpendicular to it. They form the horizontal bar.
Okay, I can picture that.
From that position, the U.S. ships can fire all their guns, front and back turrets, a full broadside at the leading British ship. The British ship can only fire its front guns in return. It's a massive firepower advantage. The U.S. just hammers the British lead ships one by one as they come out.
Sam Carston watches this destruction, and he feels good about it.
He feels justified. He thinks about how the British helped destroy the Union in 1862. He sees the burning ships as payback. That's for the blockade, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a massive strategic victory. The U.S. basically kicks Britain out of the Pacific in one afternoon.
So they win in Hawaii. But up north, in Canada, things get messy.
The Northern Front. The U.S. invades Canada.
Which makes sense militarily. Canada is British territory. It's a front they have to open. But we see it through the eyes of a civilian, Arthur McGregor.
This was the most heartbreaking storyline for me. McGregor is just a farmer in Manitoba. He grows wheat. He's not political. He watches the British and Canadian army retreat past his farm.
And he decides to stay. A bad choice, it turns out.
He thinks, I'm a civilian, I'll just mind my own business. But the war comes to his doorstep. A French-Canadian officer, Lieutenant Lapin, tries to set up a rear-guard defense in McGregor's barn.
And the U.S. Army arrives.
And they are ruthless. They aren't looking to take prisoners. They blast the barn. They overrun the position. The description of the U.S. infantry sweeping through the wheat fields, McGregor compares them to a thresher, a machine for harvesting. But they are harvesting men.
And after the battle, the interaction between McGregor and the U.S. soldiers, that's what got me.
It turns dark. The U.S. soldiers are pumped up, aggressive. They threaten McGregor. They threaten his son. One of them basically says, "You step out of line and we'll burn this place down and call it an accident."
And that changes McGregor.
Instantly. He goes from a passive farmer to a man planning revenge. He realizes that as long as the Americans are there, his family isn't safe. It hints at what's coming, a brutal partisan war. The U.S. can occupy the land, but they've made an enemy of the people.
So, occupation in the north, victory in the Pacific, stalemate in the east. That leaves one more front, the south.
Mexico, or what used to be Mexico.
Right. The CSA bought the provinces of Sonora and Chihuahua from the Mexican Empire. They own a chunk of northern Mexico to have a rail line to the Pacific Ocean.
It gives them a port on the west coast, Guaymas, which is critical for getting supplies from, say, Britain.
So the U.S. sends an army to cut that line. And this is where we meet Captain Irving Morrell.
Now, remember Custer, the old, fat, stuck-in-the-past general.
Morrell is the anti-Custer.
Precisely. He's young. He studies war. He's actually read the German tactical manuals. He understands that you can't just charge into machine guns. You have to move fast. You have to flank. He's leading a lightning war into the desert.
He's trying to invent blitzkrieg in 1914.
He is. He pushes his men hard. Sweat saves blood, he tells them. He maneuvers around the Confederates instead of hitting them head on. He's brilliant. He's what the U.S. Army needs.
Even brilliant people get unlucky.
They do. There's a skirmish at a ranch house, a minor engagement. Morrell gets into a firefight. He runs out of ammo. He has to charge with a bayonet, the one thing he hates doing, the old, stupid way of fighting.
Then he gets shot.
Takes a bullet in the leg. It's a stark reminder. You can be the smartest tactician in the Army. You can have the best plan, but a random bullet from a scared kid hiding behind a wall can still take you out.
It feels like a lesson for the whole war. You can plan all you want, but chaos wins.
Chaos always wins.
So let's pull back and look at the whole board. It's late 1914. The U.S. has invaded Canada and Mexico. They've smashed the British fleet in the Pacific. But the CSA is holding the line in Virginia and Kentucky. Washington, D.C. is in ruins.
It's a stalemate of horrific proportions. The U.S. has more men and more factories, but the CSA is fighting a defensive war on their own ground with British help. It's a meat grinder.
And the technology is accelerating at a terrifying rate. We've seen the barrels, we've seen the airplanes being used for reconnaissance.
And that's the scary part. In our timeline, it took years for tanks to appear on the Western Front. Here, they are on the field in the first months. Because these two nations have been staring at each other down the barrel of a gun for 50 years. The arms race never stopped.
This brings me to the big question, the so what of this deep dive. Why does this timeline matter? What is Turtledove trying to tell us with this whole setup?
I think he's deconstructing the idea of American exceptionalism.
Unpack that. What do you mean?
Well, we grow up believing that America is special, that we are the city on a hill, that we are inherently better or more moral than the old world of Europe with its constant wars and kings and its messy history.
Right. We stay out of foreign entanglements. We value freedom, all that stuff.
But this timeline asks a really uncomfortable question. Are we peaceful because of who we are? Or are we peaceful because of where we are? In our reality, the U.S. is surrounded by relatively weak neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and two massive oceans. We were safe. We could afford to be a democracy. We could afford to be idealistic.
But in this timeline,
you put a hostile, rival superpower right on the southern border. You take away the safety. You put a permanent threat right there. And suddenly the United States acts exactly like a European power.
we get militaristic, we get paranoid, we ally with tyrants like the Kaiser because we need the help.
We build forts, we conscript soldiers, we shell cities, we become just another blood-soaked continent like Europe. Lincoln's prophecy came true. He found friends in Europe, but to do it, America had to become European.
That is a depressing thought, that our soul is just a product of our geography.
It's a cautionary tale. It shows how fragile democracy and liberty really are when you're fighting for survival.
And there's that other ticking time bomb we mentioned, the internal war. That hasn't gone away.
The class war. While the armies are butchering each other in the trenches, the Marxists in the South and the disgruntled workers in the North are watching. They're waiting.
The Red Revolution.
It suggests that this war might not end with a treaty between Roosevelt and Wilson. It might end with a total social collapse. If the CSA bleeds itself dry holding off the Yankees, who is left to stop Cassius and his revolutionaries from burning the plantations?
So we're looking at a potential Soviet Union rising in the American South.
It's on the table, and that is a terrifying prospect for everyone involved, North and South.
Oh, I am. I'm going to need a minute to process that. We started with a map, and we ended with the potential collapse of civilization in North America.
Just another day in the multiverse.
It certainly makes you appreciate the history we actually got.
Yeah.
As messy as World War I was for the world, at least it didn't happen in Kentucky.
And at least the Capitol Dome is still in one piece.
For now. Thank you so much for guiding us through this alternative nightmare. It's been fascinating, horrifying, but fascinating.
My pleasure. It's always good to look into the abyss occasionally. Reminds you what's at stake.
And thank you, the listener, for tuning in to the deep dive. If you enjoyed this trip into the what if, let us know. Keep your heads down, keep your passbooks. Actually, burn the passbooks. We'll see you next time.